The White Mountain Bigfoot, Volume 1, Chapter 3, The Jump. Suddenly, I was awake. I was not sure why, but I sensed something was wrong. Was it the can that had moved? I lay there listening carefully into the dark. The fire was down to a few glowing coals. The heavy breathing from the back room was regular and unbroken. It had been 3 days since the attack. Samson was healing well under the care of Delilah, but was a long way from being ready to fight. Then I heard it again. I lay there in the dark trying to place the sound. It sounded like sticks bumping against each other. Immediately I knew what was going on. Someone was stacking brush against the opening of the cave to smoke us out. I had seen this tactic used in the war. There was no time to waste. I pulled my boots on quickly and swung my gun belt around my hips. Grabbing my rifle, I went swiftly to Zacchaeus, who was sleeping near the fire on a deerskin. Touching his shoulder gently, he was awake instantly. I pointed toward the entrance to the cave. Already I could see the light from the flames flickering on the cave wall, and smoke was filling the air. I motioned for him to go get his parents. Making my way to the corner, I peered carefully around. Seeing a shadow through the flames, I fired into it, then twice more to the left and the right. The shadow fell to the ground, and on my third shot I heard a satisfying yell. Not sure if it was from surprise or a hit. I didn't wait around to find out. My eyes were starting to water, and I was coughing from the smoke. Grabbing a slim piece of firewood and wrapping some rags soaked in animal grease that I had already prepared to make a torch with, I quickly struck a match and lit the torch. All of the beasts were there now, Samson being supported by Delilah. I motioned for them to follow me. Ducking into the side tunnel I used as a bedroom, I stepped over my bedroll and dropped to my knees, where I began crawling back into the tunnel. Soon it was low enough that Samson and Delilah were lying flat on their stomachs, sliding along. I was hoping that I was not leading them to their deaths, or mine for that matter, trapped in a dead-end tunnel. I did not see any other options. We would die from the smoke if we stayed in the main area of the cave. If we tried to run for it, we would be shot full of arrows the instant we came through the fire. Fortunately, the slight breeze I had detected my first few days in the cave was enough to keep the smoke at bay in the side passage we were in. Looking back, I could see Samson was struggling to make the crawl with his one good arm. He was not making a sound, though, as he rested briefly before coming on. The passage abruptly opened up and I was able to stand up. Samson and Delilah had to stand in a bent-over position, which had to be excruciating for Samson, with the wounds in his back. I saw that at least 2 of his wounds had opened back up and started bleeding again. Rounding a corner, I could see daylight. I put the torch out and stuck it into a crevice in the wall. It was not yet full daylight, but light enough to see well. The rising sun would soon be coming over the ridge and shining directly into the cave opening where we stood. Samson had slumped down against the wall and was resting with his eyes closed while Delilah tended to his wounds. Wiping the dust from my Colt and rifle, I checked the action and loads to make sure I was ready for trouble. I replaced the 3 spent rounds in the rifle from earlier. Walking to the opening, I carefully looked out. My heart dropped into the pit of my stomach. We were on a ledge about 125 feet in the air. To the right was nothing but smooth rock face. To the left was a narrow ledge about 4 inches wide. There were few handholds. It might work if we were careful. Then I remembered Samson would never be able to make it. His right arm was completely useless, and I doubted he would have the strength even if he could use it. Anyway, the ledge disappeared around a slight bend in the cliff wall, and there was no guarantee it went anywhere once around the corner. Looking over the edge, I got a queasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I was looking into a crater-like depression with sheer walls on our side, but rough and broken on the other. In the bottom was a pool. The shadows in the bottom prevented me from being able to see how deep the pool was. Maybe we could just wait where we were, and the attackers would leave. Somehow, I doubted they would give up that easily. I was sure it was the same group of renegade Apaches from the White Mountains that had shot and chased me and shot Samson. I was sure I had recognized the one Zacchaeus and I had buried. They would want blood, and Lone Wolf needed this victory. At this point, the young warriors with him were undoubtedly beginning to question his medicine. It had always been strong in the past, as the many scalps hanging from his lodgepole attested to, but he had lost face twice recently and needed to recover from that. As I stood there, I heard them coming from back inside the cave. They had found us then. Firing a few shots back down the passage, I went and looked over the edge again. I knew I could not keep them at bay forever. Soon they would realize that they had the advantage over me and the beast being silhouetted against the rising sun, and they would know that I could not see them while looking back into the darkness. They knew I would eventually run out of ammunition if I kept firing blindly into the dark, or they would pick us off one by one from the shadows. Looking over the edge again, I made the decision. Waving Zacchaeus over to the edge, I made as if to jump. Then I pointed at the pool of water. He nodded, catching on quickly. Going back to where Samson was resting, he grunted and pointed towards the edge. Then he helped Delilah get Samson to his feet. They went to the edge and looked down. An arrow whizzed by me and narrowly missed Delilah before arching out over the basin. Quickly, I fired several rounds back into the darkness, spacing each shot about 2 feet apart, hoping to hit something. A grunt and a death moan from the third shot rewarded my efforts. I shouted at the beasts and waved at them to jump. Picking the youngster up in her arms, Delilah gave Samson a gentle push over the edge. Zacchaeus followed quickly behind Samson. I fired again into the darkness to keep the attackers back. This would not work for much longer. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw Delilah looking at me briefly before jumping. Was it gratitude that I saw in her eyes? Waiting a few more seconds to give the beasts time to get out of the way, I fired once more into the darkness, then stepped to the edge. The beasts were crawling out of the pool, Zacchaeus and Delilah pulling Samson out. I glanced back one last time before stepping out into space. The move saved my life as an arrow took the hat off my head. A split second earlier and it would have been my head instead of my hat. Falling through space seemed to take an eternity. I had never been a fan of heights. All at once, I was grateful for the time I spent as a kid learning how to swim back at home in the creek that ran near our house. I hit the water sideways, jarring my still sore ribs and nearly knocking the air out of me. The landing had almost made me lose my grip on my rifle. I hit the bottom with both feet and pushed off, coming up gasping and choking. I swam the few feet to the edge. Wiping the water from my eyes, I looked around. Delilah growled and screamed, a blood-curdling sound. She was looking up at the ledge. Turning, I saw an Indian drawing back on his bow, readying an arrow to fire at the prostrate Samson. Not having time to aim, I fired from the hip, the bullet hitting the ledge at his feet before glancing upwards into the soft skin of his stomach. He screamed and fell forward, somersaulting into the pool. I fired twice more at the overhanging cliff face above the cave entrance, hearing the nasty whine of the ricochets as they flew indiscriminately into the cave. Delilah and Zacchaeus had already picked Samson up and half carried, half drug him back into the shelter of the overhanging safety, out of the line of fire from above. Samson collapsed on the sand, exhausted. His great strength was gone. He would not be able to go much farther, if at all. Looking around, I decided this was as good a place as any to make a stand. There were plenty of rocks around at the base of the cliff to hide behind, and with a little work, more could be piled up to create a breastwork from which to fight from behind. I helped Samson make as comfortable a bed as possible, then scouted around. The basin we were in was not more than 300 to 400 feet from the oasis where the beast lived. The water in the bottom was likely part of the same creek that flowed through the oasis. Climbing out the far side would not be difficult for a healthy adult. There was no way Samson was going to make that climb in his present condition. We were safe for the time being. We were far enough back under the overhang that we were out of range of the short but stout Apache bow from anywhere on the ridge. The far ridge was not out of range for my rifle, and they would know that. I figured they would likely try to climb down during the night and attack at daylight. That gave us plenty of time to prepare. Going back to the beasts, I sat down on a rock and cleaned and reloaded my guns as good as possible under the conditions. Going back to the beasts, I sat down on a rock and cleaned and reloaded my guns as good as possible under the conditions. Going back to the beasts, I sat down on a rock and cleaned and reloaded my guns as good as possible under the conditions. Going in my war bag that I had grabbed, I took out some venison jerky that I had dried in the sun last week. I always tried to keep my war bag at hand, ready for an emergency. I handed several pieces to Delilah and gestured towards the others. She handed them out. It would not be much for them, but it was something. Chewing on a piece of jerky, I studied the situation. There were several large boulders that had apparently fallen from the cliff that were placed about right for the start of a breastwork. We would fill in the gaps, creating a fortress of sorts. Getting up, I began stacking rocks in the gaps. Zacchaeus watched a moment, then began helping. Soon we had a decent fort of about 15 feet in diameter. We moved Samson to the back behind a large slab of rock that had sheared off the cliff face and landed on its edge with the top leaning back against the cliff wall. There was nothing to do now but wait. The hours went slowly by. Keeping a careful eye on the far rim of the basin for hostiles, I carefully scanned it for possible ways down. I identified several possible routes before I saw movement. Hunkering down behind the wall in a comfortable position, I watched carefully. Seeing what looked like a rock, except that it had not been there a few minutes ago, I took careful aim and squeezed off a shot. It was not over 300 yards, and I had been a sharpshooter in the war. As I expected, it was a head belonging to one of the Indians that was trying to spot us. The head jerked back, then disappeared. There was an angry yell. Unless they had received reinforcements, there was not likely to be more than 4, maybe 5 warriors left in fighting condition. Unless they pulled out, and I doubted they would, we were going to be fighting for our lives about daylight in the morning. They would know exactly where we were now and would hit us in a rush. Just before dark, I handed out the last of the venison jerky. We had removed the dead Indian from the pool, and since the water had a slight current to it, we had plenty to drink. I suspected the pool was part of the same creek that ran through the oasis. Zacchaeus and Delilah had gathered a number of fist-sized rocks and laid them out within arm's reach. A few practice throws from each left me little doubt they had done this before. They knew how to use the rocks as weapons. I just hoped it would be enough. Darkness finally settled and we found places to sleep. I don't think any of us slept well, knowing what was coming. Not knowing how to communicate with the beast to set up a night guard rotation, I gave up and went to sleep, trusting to my sixth sense to wake me if anyone approached. I awoke once during the night when a rock fell from the far side of the cliff. They were coming then. I was not surprised. They had to save face or go home in shame. The Indian was a proud warrior and placed great stock in victory. So far they had only dead and wounded to show for their efforts, and we had been lucky. Glancing at the stars, I figured it to be about 1 a.m. It would be a while yet. The Apache did not like to fight in the dark unless forced. He believed if he was killed, his spirit would wander around in the dark forever, unable to find its way to the happy hunting grounds. Since they believed they had the upper hand, there was no reason for them to attack at night. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed Chapter 3. The action is finally getting started, and it gets even better as we continue. Please like, subscribe, and share with anybody else that you think might enjoy it. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll know when you get more videos put up. Again, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will do a few more chapters before I call it quits on this particular book. But I've started volume 2 of the White Mountain Bigfoot, and I'm probably 2/3 of the way finished with it now. It takes a lot longer to write a book out here on the road than I would like, but hey, I got to work for a living too. So anyway, thanks for watching. Give it a thumbs up, like it, and share it, please. I'd appreciate it.